Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world that demands presence, yet some of us are driven to withdraw, to vanish not physically perhaps, but emotionally, mentally, even spiritually. And in our absence, those left behind are often left to grapple with feelings that are complex, unsettling, and far-reaching. This is not a mere disappearance of bodies in space, but of minds, hearts, and connections. So what do they feel when you simply disappear? When you disappear, the first thing they feel is confusion. It begins as a quiet murmur, an unsettled feeling that gnaws at them when they realize you're no longer present in the way you once were. It's an absence that's almost imperceptible at first, like a light flickering in the corner of their awareness. They don't know what's wrong, but they can feel that something is missing, something important, something that used to be there. It's as if the world is slightly out of focus, the colors a bit duller, the sounds a bit muted. This confusion doesn't come from a lack of understanding about where you physically are. It comes from the inability to grasp what is happening to the relationship, the connection, the bond that once existed between you and them. In the absence of direct communication or explanation, the mind starts to search for logical answers. They wonder if something has changed in your life, something they didn't know about, something they should have known. Had you grown distant gradually and they simply didn't notice? Or was there a specific moment that broke the invisible thread that kept you tied together? The confusion comes not from a simple, obvious reason, but from the complexity of emotions that are left unsaid. They may ask themselves, is this my fault? Did I do something wrong? Even if you didn't say it out loud, they will replay every conversation, every shared moment, every gesture, trying to find the reason for your disappearance. The question of whether they were the cause, whether they failed in some way, looms large. If they were to pinpoint a moment, a conversation, or even a word that might have led to this disconnection, it would somehow make the whole situation more manageable. But in the absence of those concrete answers, they are left with uncertainty. For many, this confusion is also compounded by a sense of disbelief. It is one thing to feel an absence and wonder about it, but it is another to come to terms with the fact that you have, in some way, chosen to disappear, chosen not to explain, not to acknowledge the bond that once was. This feels like a betrayal of an unwritten rule, a breach of the social contract of relationships. There's an unspoken understanding that when people share their lives with one another, when they become intertwined, there will always be some form of communication, some attempt at understanding, even if things fall apart. To simply vanish without a word, without even a trace of where you've gone or why, is incomprehensible to those left behind. As they navigate this emotional terrain, their minds continue to spiral, searching for any clues, any pattern, any sign that could shed light on the situation. They replay the last interaction, sometimes obsessively, looking for that one moment that explains everything. In the absence of that clarity, confusion becomes a heavy, weighty fog that obscures not just your disappearance, but their own understanding of themselves, of the relationship, and even of their place in the world. And it's this confusion, the lack of answers, the uncertainty that sets the stage for everything that follows. It shapes the emotions, the thoughts, and the actions that will come in the aftermath of your absence. It lingers in the spaces where you used to be, and it refuses to be ignored. It is the first and perhaps most disorienting feeling they will experience when you simply disappear. Soon after the confusion sets in, the feeling of loss takes hold. This loss is not immediate, not abrupt, but a gradual sinking into the realization that something once integral to their world has been stripped away. It's a subtle but profound shift. At first, they might not even be able to name it clearly. It's not just about missing someone in the physical sense. It's the awareness that a part of their life has been erased, leaving a void that cannot be filled by anything else. They begin to see the gaps where you once were, in the empty chair across from them, in the quiet moments that once were filled with your presence, in the silence that stretches between words that used to flow easily. Loss is something that permeates everything. It touches the small, everyday moments that once seemed insignificant. A conversation about nothing in particular, a shared glance over a cup of coffee, the way you would make them laugh in the middle of a stressful day. These are the things that, when absent, become stark in their absence. The world, once full of the familiar rhythm you both created, now feels out of sync. Where there used to be a comfortable hum of shared understanding, now there is only a quiet ache. As they realize the depth of the loss, they also begin to mourn not just the person you were, but the future that they once imagined with you in it. It's a loss of potential, a loss of possibility. They mourn the future conversations, the moments that will never come, the inside jokes that will never be made. The things that were taken for granted in the closeness you shared now feel like a distant dream, something that was real only in memory, fading away the more time passes. This mourning is not always obvious. Often it is something they feel quietly inside, something they may not even fully express, but that is felt in the rhythm of their days. It shows in their reluctance to engage in activities that once brought them joy, in the way they try to fill the empty space with distractions, but nothing seems to quite work. The loss is not just of your physical presence, it is of the emotional connection, the shared understanding that created a foundation for everything else in their life. The absence leaves them feeling like a part of themselves is missing, as though they are no longer whole. What makes this loss even more difficult to bear is that it's a loss without closure. There was no moment of finality, no goodbye, no explanation. It's a loss that remains suspended in time, unresolved and unacknowledged. Without closure, the grieving process is long, drawn out, and unsteady. They are left to navigate the uncertainty of never truly understanding why you left, never fully comprehending the reasons behind the disappearance. In the absence of an explanation, the emotional landscape they now inhabit is shaped entirely by the void you left behind. This kind of loss doesn't always present itself as a raw, immediate pain. It can be quieter, more insidious. It lingers in the background of their days, sometimes surfacing in moments of vulnerability, other times remaining dormant but always present. The weight of it is heavy, and it takes time for them to recognize just how deeply it has affected them. And yet it is always there, like a shadow that follows them wherever they go, reminding them of what was and what will never be again. As the days pass without a word from you, the silence begins to grow heavier, and with it comes a deepening sense of isolation. The absence of communication, once an occasional lull in the flow of life, has now become a permanent fixture. They are no longer just missing your presence, they are missing the very thread of connection that once tied them to you. It is as if they've been left adrift on an empty sea, surrounded by familiar faces and voices, yet unable to reach anyone or anything that could offer them solace. They realize that it is not only your absence that has left them feeling lost, it is the silence that has replaced the once constant, comforting rhythm of your exchanges. This silence doesn't just live in the spaces between their words, it begins to infiltrate their mind, their thoughts, and their emotions. It stretches out, becoming a barrier that makes everything feel distant and unreachable. What once felt like a shared world now feels divided, as if the space between them and everyone else has expanded. They no longer feel fully connected to the people around them because in the deepest part of their heart, they are still waiting for your return, still hoping for a sound, a gesture, a message that would cut through the quiet and pull them back into the life they once shared with you. The isolation grows more pronounced with time, especially when they realize that they are the only one left in this limbo. They search for some kind of response, some indication that you might be thinking of them, but the silence remains unbroken. And in that silence, they begin to question themselves, wondering if they have somehow become irrelevant, invisible, unworthy of the connection they once thought was mutual. As the silence stretches on, the unanswered questions begin to pile up, each one more persistent than the last. They can't help but ask, why? Why did you disappear? What happened? Was there a moment they missed? A turning point that slipped by unnoticed? They replay every interaction, searching for a clue, a hint, anything that could explain what went wrong. They might even convince themselves that if they can find that one missing piece, the whole puzzle will fall into place. But no matter how hard they search, the answers remain elusive, like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. This uncertainty weighs heavily on them. The absence of an explanation transforms the situation from one of simple loss to one of profound confusion and frustration. They feel trapped in a maze of questions with no way out, no direction forward. There's a sense that they've been abandoned without cause or reason, and that feeling of being left in the dark only intensifies their desire for answers. But the answers never come, and instead they are left alone with their own speculations and fears. They wonder if there's something fundamentally wrong with them, something that made them unworthy of the courtesy of an explanation. Could they have done something differently? Could they have said something that would have kept you around? The longer they are left to wonder, the more the unanswered questions begin to warp into doubts about themselves. They start questioning their own worth, their own role in the relationship, as if they are somehow to blame for your disappearance. With each passing day, the uncertainty grows, and the questions become more pointed, more accusatory, as they search desperately for some kind of closure that never comes. True independence is often misunderstood as the mere absence of dependence on others, but it is far more nuanced. It is not about living in isolation or rejecting all forms of human connection. Rather, it is the inner strength and self-sufficiency that allows a person to navigate the world on her own terms. True independence means being able to define oneself, to make choices that align with one's values, and to stand firm in one's beliefs, regardless of external pressures or expectations. For the modern woman, independence represents the ability to carve out her own identity, free from societal constraints or the roles others seek to impose upon her. It is about the freedom to be fully herself without sacrificing her integrity or her personal vision of who she is and what she stands for. At its core, independence involves the capacity to think and act autonomously. It is the strength to make decisions based on personal judgment, rather than the approval or validation of others. It is the courage to pursue one's own ambitions, even in the face of criticism or discouragement. This form of independence is often cultivated through self-awareness, the deep understanding of one's desires, fears, strengths, and weaknesses. It is a mental and emotional state in which a woman can act in alignment with her true self, unencumbered by the weight of societal expectations that so often seek to shape her life for her. In this sense, independence is not about being alone or detached. It is about having the confidence to stand by one's choices and to rely on one's own judgment. The freedom that independence offers is invaluable. It enables individuals to pursue personal growth, whether through education, career advancement, or creative expression. It offers the opportunity to define success on one's own terms, not according to traditional metrics of wealth or status, but through the lens of personal fulfillment. This can be liberating, particularly for women who have historically been confined to restrictive roles that limited their freedom to explore the world and themselves. The ability to choose a path that resonates with one's authentic self is a powerful tool for personal empowerment. However, true independence also involves a deep sense of responsibility. It is not merely the freedom to act without constraint, but the ability to take full ownership of one's decisions, actions, and their consequences. A woman who is truly independent understands that her choices have weight and significance both for herself and for those around her. Independence is not about avoiding accountability or shirking responsibility. Rather, it is about owning the outcomes of one's choices and being empowered to change direction when necessary. The modern woman's independence is not just about professional or financial self-sufficiency. It is also emotional and intellectual autonomy, the ability to think critically, to question norms, to reject ideas and systems that do not serve her well. This is a vital aspect of independence. Emotional autonomy allows her to make decisions based on her feelings and needs rather than seeking validation from others. It involves the capacity to hold her own in the face of challenges, to find inner peace in moments of chaos, and to cultivate self-love and self-compassion. Intellectual autonomy allows her to seek knowledge and wisdom on her own terms, to explore new ideas without the influence of outside opinions, and to form her own worldview based on personal experiences and critical reflection. This kind of independence also provides a sense of security. When a woman is truly independent, she is not reliant on others to feel validated, fulfilled, or secure. She knows that her worth is intrinsic, not determined by the approval or affection of others. This security enables her to engage in relationships and communities in a healthy and balanced way. She can give love without losing herself, and she can receive love without feeling diminished. Independence in this sense does not create isolation, but rather fosters the freedom to choose relationships that align with her values and needs. At the same time, the cultivation of independence does not mean rejecting all dependence. While true independence is about being self-reliant, it is also about recognizing that we are all interdependent beings, reliant on others in many ways. No one exists in a vacuum. Emotional and social connections are part of the human experience, and independence does not mean being disconnected from others. Rather, it is the ability to engage in relationships from a place of self-awareness and strength, recognizing that interdependence is a natural and healthy aspect of life. Independence allows a person to choose relationships that are enriching and supportive rather than those that are draining or limiting. It empowers one to seek out connections that are based on mutual respect and shared values rather than obligation or dependence. The concept of independence, particularly for women, has evolved over time. In the past, women were often expected to derive their identity from the roles they played within their families or communities. They were seen as dependent upon their fathers, husbands, or male relatives, and their worth was often tied to their ability to fulfill these roles. Today, women have the freedom to choose a different path to define themselves, not through the roles others assign them, but through their own choices and ambitions. This shift has been revolutionary, allowing women to explore careers, education, and personal goals that were once out of reach. Yet, Even in today's world, the idea of independence for women remains complex. While women are encouraged to be independent, strong, and self-sufficient, societal pressures still exist that often question or undermine a woman's independence. Women may be told that they must be both independent and nurturing, successful and humble, career-driven and family-oriented all at once. This contradictory set of expectations can make it difficult for women to feel that they can truly be themselves without compromise. The pressure to have it all can undermine the very independence that society encourages, forcing women to navigate conflicting demands that often create stress, confusion, and self-doubt. Moreover, the expectation that women should be independent can sometimes lead to a form of emotional isolation. In a culture that emphasizes self-sufficiency, there may be an unspoken assumption that needing help or relying on others is a sign of weakness. Women who struggle to balance their independence with the desire for connection may find themselves caught in a paradox. If they lean too heavily on others for support, they may feel that they are losing their independence. Yet if they hold too tightly to their independence, they may feel emotionally distant or disconnected. True independence requires finding a balance between strength and vulnerability, between autonomy and connection. It requires recognizing that being independent does not mean being impervious to the needs of others, nor does it mean that one must always stand alone. Independence is about having the strength to make choices that align with one's own values and desires, while also understanding the value of relationships that support and enhance one's life. The truly independent woman understands that she does not need to choose between autonomy and love. She can embrace both, allowing each to enrich and empower the other. In this sense, independence is not an end goal, but a process, an ongoing journey of self-discovery, self-definition, and self-reliance. It is about continuously learning how to navigate the complexities of life while remaining true to oneself, recognizing that independence is not a static state but a dynamic force that evolves as we grow and change. True independence is not about rejecting connection or love. It is about embracing them in a way that allows for personal growth, mutual respect, and a deep sense of fulfillment. Even when they know deep down that they are not at fault, guilt begins to creep in. It starts as a quiet whisper, a subtle nagging thought that suggests maybe there was something they missed, something they should have done differently. Was there something in their actions or even in their inaction that made you retreat? Did they say the wrong thing, fail to be there when you needed them, or somehow push you away without realizing it? Guilt is a powerful force because it doesn't need a solid foundation to take root. It thrives on uncertainty, on the question marks left in the wake of an unanswered departure. Even if they are not responsible for your disappearance, they cannot escape the feeling that they could have done something, anything that might have prevented this. This guilt can be paralyzing. They start to overanalyze every moment, every word spoken, every silence, wondering where things went wrong. They may replay interactions from the past, searching for signs, for hints they might have missed, anything that could explain what happened, anything that could absolve them of the sense that they somehow contributed to the unraveling of a relationship. They might even begin to feel ashamed of themselves, as though their very existence somehow played a part in the loss. The deeper they delve into this self-blame, the more isolated they become, trapped in a loop of regret and remorse that has no clear resolution. And yet the reality is that guilt, in the absence of any real wrongdoing, becomes a form of self-punishment. It is a way of assuming responsibility for something that is beyond their control, something that cannot be fixed. This guilt is not rooted in truth, but in the emotional void left by your disappearance, making it an impossible burden to shake off, no matter how irrational it may be. As the days stretch into weeks or even months, hope begins to emerge, fragile but persistent. They hold on to the belief, however faint, that you might return. They hold on to the hope that you will reach out, whether through a call, a message, or some other form of communication, that something will bridge the chasm between you. They imagine what it would be like for you to return, to acknowledge the space you once shared, to restore the connection that seems lost. This hope becomes a small, steady flame in the midst of the darkness, a flicker of possibility that things might return to the way they once were. Every day they check their phone, their inbox, their messages, half expecting to see a notification from you, hoping that the silence will be broken. They tell themselves that maybe today is the day, maybe today the wait will end. This hope, though small, is a lifeline keeping them afloat in the turbulent sea of emotions that follow your disappearance. It allows them to imagine that things are not truly over, that this break, this distance is just temporary. After all, relationships are not always linear. People grow apart and come back together. They cling to that possibility, unable to accept that the finality of your disappearance might be real. But with each passing day, as the silence remains unbroken, that hope begins to transform. What was once a bright beacon now dims with uncertainty. The waiting becomes more painful, more excruciating, as they wonder if the hope they've clung to was merely a fantasy, a figment of their longing. Yet they are reluctant to let it go. Because to let go of hope is to admit that you may never come back, that what was once shared is truly gone. This hope, both a source of comfort and pain, continues to burn quietly in the background, even as the reality of your absence becomes harder to ignore. As time passes and the silence stretches on, the feelings that once accompanied your absence begin to transform. What was initially a gentle sorrow starts to harden into something sharper: resentment. The questions of why you disappeared without a word grow louder, and the weight of unanswered emotions becomes more burdensome. They start to feel that your decision to leave was not just an absence, but a deliberate act of disregard. It feels less like a mutual separation and more like an abandonment, as if they were left to fend for themselves without the dignity of closure or explanation. The more they reflect on it, the more resentment builds. They think of the time, the energy, the vulnerability they invested, only to have it dismissed so abruptly. They wonder, how could you just walk away? In their mind, they feel as though they deserve something more, something that acknowledges the history you shared. They begin to resent not only the act of your disappearance, but the way it makes them feel about themselves. They begin to question their own worth, thinking that if they had been enough, you wouldn't have left. This resentment is not just about you, it's about how they have been left to navigate the wreckage of something that once seemed stable and secure. It's a quiet, simmering anger that doesn't always manifest in obvious ways, but sits beneath the surface, coloring their thoughts and actions. They might feel bitter when they encounter other people who still have their relationships intact, or they might lash out, even unknowingly, at those who remind them of what they've lost. This resentment, however, is a defense mechanism, something to protect themselves from the hurt that comes with an unanswered departure. It allows them to hold on to a sense of control, even when everything else feels uncontrollable. Eventually, after the confusion, the loss, the unanswered questions, and the growing resentment, there comes a quiet, reluctant acceptance. It is not an acceptance born of peace or closure, but of the slow recognition that the situation cannot be undone. The hope that you would return, that you would explain or acknowledge the bond you once shared, begins to fade, and with it, so does the emotional turbulence that has been their constant companion. They come to terms with the fact that you are no longer part of their life, at least not in the way they once imagined. But this acceptance does not come easily, nor does it arrive with any sense of resolution. It's a weary acceptance, one that happens in small, almost imperceptible moments. They realize little by little that they cannot continue waiting for something that may never come. They start to accept that their life, the one they once envisioned with you in it, will have to continue without you. It's not a sudden shift, not a dramatic moment of clarity, but rather a gradual letting go, a slow, painful understanding that they must move forward, even though a part of them will always be tied to the past. This acceptance is not the same as closure. It's an acknowledgement that the story as they knew it is over. They may still feel the pang of your absence, still find themselves thinking of you from time to time, but the urgency to make sense of it all begins to subside. The pain doesn't vanish, it simply finds a quieter place to reside. They may even begin to rebuild their lives, to form new connections, but the shadow of what was will always linger, just beyond reach, always reminding them of what was lost.